Welcome to this deep dive. So, looks like we're diving into the history of Facebook today. You've given us some fascinating stuff to work with. We've got excerpts from a podcast about Facebook's origins and impact,
Right.
and then this other audio clip. It's wild. It almost sounds like Facebook is like a restaurant menu, just offering everything you could possibly want to see.
That's a really interesting way to put it, yeah. I think what's so fascinating about these sources is how they highlight how we connect with each other
Yeah.
in the digital age. I mean, it's changed so much, right?
Coldly.
So we're going to go all the way back to Facebook's beginnings, like starting as just a college project and
Yeah.
then becoming this global phenomenon.
Wow.
And we'll look at how it's changed our lives, for better or worse, you know?
I'm ready.
Yeah.
So, before we get to Mark Zuckerberg hunched over his computer in his dorm room,
Right.
let's go back even further.
Okay.
What was the internet like? I mean, way back before Facebook even existed.
Okay, so imagine like no smartphones, and the only way you can get online is through like those dial-up modems.
Oh, I vaguely remember those.
Yeah, and like AOL and Prodigy, those were like
Yeah.
the big things back then. Like those were the gateways to online, you know?
Wow. So how did people even like connect online back then?
It was mostly things like chat rooms,
Mhm.
forums, and there were some very early, very early attempts at social networking. Like there was this thing called 6 Degrees, but you know, technology just wasn't there yet. Like forget mobile internet, most people didn't even have broadband.
Right.
So it was just a completely different world from like what led to Facebook's huge growth.
Right. Okay, so then in the early 2000s, MySpace just kind of blew up, right?
Yeah.
Like, was that the real turning point for social media?
I mean, MySpace was definitely a big deal. It was like the first time people really got into creating these personalized profiles,
Yeah.
connecting with friends online, and like sharing music and photos. So yeah, they set the stage for everything that came after. But even MySpace probably wouldn't have predicted just how big Facebook would become.
It's true. Okay, so now Mark Zuckerberg enters the scene. This podcast we have mentions he was really into those empire building games like
Yeah.
Risk and Civilization.
Oh, yeah.
So is it just a coincidence that he ended up creating this huge digital empire of his own?
It's kind of crazy to think about, right? Like how his early interests actually
Yeah.
might have shaped where he ended up. Even, you know, thinking back to that whole face smash thing that got him in trouble at Harvard.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It shows like even back then he had this drive to connect people,
Hmm.
even if it meant like pushing the boundaries of what's okay, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so remind me about Face Mash. What was that all about and why was it so controversial?
So basically, he hacked into Harvard's student database
Oh, wow.
and made this website where people could rate how attractive other students were.
Oh, no.
It went super viral, but obviously it caused a huge uproar about privacy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it really showed that Zuckerberg was willing to test the limits, even back then.
It sounds like that was just the beginning of the whole privacy issue
Yeah.
that Facebook would have to deal with later.
Oh, yeah.
So how did Facebook, the company, even start? We know Zuckerberg built it with some of his friends at Harvard,
Right.
but what was their like original plan for it?
So in the beginning, they actually called it the Facebook.
Oh, really?
And it was supposed to be like a digital version of those printed student directories
Oh,
that they would give out at the start of the year. They just wanted to create a space online where students could like connect, share info,
Yeah.
and build a community.
makes sense. And they started by making it only for Harvard students, right?
Right.
Was that just because it was easier to start that way?
Mm.
Or was it part of like a bigger strategy?
It was totally strategic. By only letting people with Harvard email addresses join,
Mm-hmm.
they created this like feeling of exclusivity and fear of missing out or FOMO. So that made it spread like wildfire within Harvard.
Wow.
And that became the basis for how they expanded later on.
So it was like this digital VIP club that everyone wanted in on.
Yeah.
And that's what fueled their growth.
Exactly. Think about it.
Yeah.
If everyone around you is talking about something you can't access,
Right.
it makes you want to be part of it even more, right?
Absolutely.
It's like textbook network effect in action.
So they dominated Harvard. What happened next? How did they go from this small college network to like a worldwide phenomenon?
They were really smart about how they grew. First, they targeted other top universities,
Okay.
like, you know, Columbia and Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
Then they slowly opened it up to other colleges and high schools. This step-by-step approach let them build momentum and like actually handle the growth, you know?
So it was all about tapping into that need to connect and belong.
Yeah.
But at some point, Facebook became way more than just a way to keep up with your friends, right?
Right.
When did it make that shift?
I'd say the biggest turning point was when they introduced the news feed in 2006.
Okay.
It completely changed Facebook. Like it went from just being these static profiles
Yeah.
to this constantly updating stream of like updates, photos, and everything people were doing.
Right.
And it created the sense of like, I need to see what's happening right now
And
that no one had really seen before.
so the newsfeed was a game changer for sure. But how did that lead to Facebook becoming this advertising giant?
Yeah, the newsfeed was huge, but it also kind of set the stage for how Facebook makes money with ads.
Oh, right.
Like by tracking what people are doing and what they like,
Uh-huh.
they can show them very specific ads,
Yeah.
which made Facebook super valuable to businesses.
So the newsfeed wasn't just about keeping people glued to Facebook. It
Right.
was also about like collecting data to sell ads.
Exactly. And as Facebook grew, they needed more and more money to like keep the servers running and all that. It makes
Yeah.
sense. They needed a way to make money that could keep up with their growth.
Right.
And that's where targeted advertising came in.
This is when Sheryl Sandberg joins the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
The podcast mentioned she joined Facebook in 2008
Yeah.
and was like really important in making their ad business so successful.
Oh, for sure. Sandberg had all this experience from Google
Yeah.
and really understood how online advertising works.
Right.
So with her leading the charge, they got even better at targeting ads. And that's what turned Facebook into the advertising powerhouse it is today.
It's kind of amazing to think about how they went from this like college project to a multi-billion-dollar company so
Yeah.
fast.
It is.
But it wasn't always smooth sailing, right?
Yeah.
The podcast mentioned some controversial things they did along the way. Like, remember that whole Beacon thing?
Oh, yeah. Beacon. That was
Remind me what that was.
so Beacon was this attempt to like bring Facebook into everything you did online.
Okay.
The idea was to track what people did on other websites and then share it with their Facebook friends.
So, like, if I bought something online, all my Facebook friends would know.
Yeah, basically. But people freaked out. Like they felt like their privacy was being invaded.
Makes sense.
There was this huge backlash.
Wow.
And Facebook ended up having to shut Beacon down and apologize.
That's a pretty big blunder. It seems like Facebook was always pushing the limits of what people would be okay with.
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely trying new things all the time,
Right.
but sometimes they messed up. Beacon was a big wake-up call for them about, how important privacy is to people
Yeah.
and how they needed to be more transparent about what data they were collecting.
Okay, so privacy was going to be an ongoing issue.
Mm.
But let's talk about how smartphones changed everything.
Right?
Like, what happened to Facebook when everyone started using their phones all the time?
Oh, that was huge for Facebook. As smartphones became more and more popular, people were spending less time on their computers and more time on their phones. Facebook had to adapt or they would become like irrelevant.
So they had to completely redesign everything to work on phones.
Exactly. And that transition wasn't easy.
Right.
I mean, remember their IPO in 2012? It wasn't as successful as they hoped because investors were worried about whether Facebook could handle the switch to mobile.
Oh, wow. So people were skeptical.
They were, but Facebook proved them wrong.
Okay.
They put a ton of effort into making their app work great on phones, even with small screens and slower connections,
Yeah.
and it totally paid off. They
Right.
became like the biggest social media app on phones.
They really turned it around. And they also bought another company around this time, right?
And you're talking about Instagram. Yeah, buying Instagram in 2012 was a brilliant move.
Really?
Yeah, Instagram was becoming super popular for sharing photos on phones,
Mhm.
and they were attracting a lot of younger users.
Oh, okay.
So by buying them, Facebook wasn't just getting more users, they were also eliminating a potential rival.
I see. Like getting rid of the competition before they became a real threat.
Exactly. It was a smart move to stay on top.
It was a smart move for sure. But as Facebook's power grew, so did the controversies around them, right? Like
Yeah.
the 2016 U.S. election really showed how social media could be used in negative ways.
Right.
What role did Facebook play in all that, and how did it affect their image?
The 2016 election really showed how easy it is to manipulate social media and spread misinformation.
did.
Facebook became this battleground for political ads, and
Mhm.
people were using it to spread fake news and propaganda, which might have actually influenced how people voted.
So it's like Facebook was a platform for like information warfare, even if they didn't mean for it to be.
Yeah, kind of. You see, the algorithms that Facebook uses to show people things they're interested in
Mhm.
also created these filter bubbles.
Filter bubbles?
Yeah, where people only see information that agrees with their existing views.
Oh, okay.
And that can make it really hard to see other perspectives. And this is how misinformation can spread so easily.
Right.
Because people are only seeing things that confirm what they already believe.
It's like reinforcing those biases, right?
Exactly. And this led to a lot of conspiracy theories and divisive content, which just made everything more polarized.
So what did Facebook do about all this? Did they admit they played a role in spreading this misinformation, or did they try to downplay it?
At first, Zuckerberg said that Facebook couldn't have possibly influenced the election.
Really?
Yeah, but as more evidence came out, they had to acknowledge the problem and start doing something about it.
So what did they do? Did it work?
They started fact-checking things, partnering with news organizations,
No.
and tweaking their algorithms to try to stop the spread of fake news.
But it feels like that's a never-ending battle, right?
Oh, totally. The people spreading misinformation are always coming up with new tricks.
Yeah.
And Facebook is constantly trying to catch up. It's a race that might never really end.
It really makes you think about, how much responsibility these social media platforms have.
It does.
I mean, where do you draw the line between letting people say what they want and protecting them from harmful stuff?
That's such a tough question, right? There are no easy answers.
No.
And as Facebook keeps changing, getting into things like the metaverse,
Yeah.
these questions are just going to become even more important.
The metaverse, that's a whole other deep dive we could do.
For sure.
But before we get into that, let's step back for a minute and think about, the bigger picture.
Okay.
How has Facebook's journey changed our relationship with technology? I mean, it's crazy to think how much things have changed, we've gone from those old dial-up connections
Yeah.
to basically having the entire world in our pockets.
It's true.
And Facebook's been a huge part of that.
Yeah, for sure. Facebook, along with, all the other social media platforms,
Right.
have completely changed the way we connect with each other, the way we communicate, how we get information.
Yeah.
It's created all these new ways for people to connect and build communities, on a scale we've never seen before.
But it hasn't all been good,
Right.
right? We've talked about the problems with privacy,
Right.
the spread of misinformation,
Yeah.
and how people can be manipulated.
It's definitely.
It's like there are two sides to this coin.
It's true. I mean, any technology that's this powerful is going to have both positive and negative consequences, right?
I guess so.
And it's up to us, all of us as users, as citizens, as a society, to figure out how to deal with the downsides
Yeah.
while still making the most of the good things it can do.
Okay, so looking ahead, Facebook rebranded as Meta,
Right.
and they're pouring tons of money into this metaverse thing.
Yeah.
What do you think that tells us about what they're planning for the future?
I think it shows that Zuckerberg believes that the next big thing for social interaction is going to be these immersive virtual worlds. The metaverse is still pretty new, but it could totally change how we work, how we have fun, even how we connect with people.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, isn't it?
It is.
Being able to hang out with people in these virtual spaces
Yeah.
as if you were actually there with them.
It's pretty wild. There are still a lot of technical challenges to figure out, but the potential is huge. Just imagine, going to a concert with your friends from all over the world,
Yeah.
or working on projects together in a virtual office, or even visiting historical places without leaving your house.
It sounds amazing, but, we're already having problems with misinformation and privacy now.
Right.
What happens when all that gets even more intense in these virtual worlds?
That's a really important point. It's definitely something that Meta and all of us really need to be thinking about now.
Yeah.
We have to be smart about the ethics of these technologies
Right.
and make sure we're protecting people and making sure the metaverse is a force for good.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Facebook,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What can we learn from Facebook's story that can help us as we move into this increasingly digital world?
I think the biggest takeaway is that technology isn't just neutral.
Okay.
The people who create it,
Right.
the ways it's used,
Right.
and what's happening in society, all of that shapes the technology.
That makes sense.
So as people who use this technology, we need to be aware of how it can affect us, both good and bad.
Right.
And we need to make sure we're using it in ethical and responsible ways, ways that benefit us and our communities.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the hype of new technology
It is.
and forget that it's not just a tool.
Yeah,
It's like an extension of who we are and what we believe in.
I like that. And as the world becomes even more digital,
Right.
we need to remember that we have the power to shape how technology develops.
They do.
It's not something that just happens to us. We're active participants in creating the digital world.
That's actually really empowering.
It is, right?
Like knowing that we have a say in how technology changes.
Absolutely. So as you continue to explore social media, the metaverse, all of that,
Uh-huh.
remember to stay informed, think critically, and use your voice to help create a digital future that aligns with your values.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the history of Facebook.
Thanks for having me.
It's been an amazing journey.
It has.
And I hope everyone listening learned some new things and got some new perspectives.
Me too. And remember, Facebook's story isn't over yet. It'll be fascinating to see how things unfold and what role they'll play in shaping our future.